Africa is often called the cradle of humanity, the place where our story began. But it is also a continent that keeps unsettling the stories we tell ourselves about the past. Because in Africa, discovery rarely feels simple. A buried skeleton can challenge what we thought we knew about human evolution. A circle in the desert can resist explanation for decades. A ruin, a symbol, a stone, even an empty space inside an ancient monument can raise questions science still cannot answer with certainty. This is a land of origins, but it is also a land of disruption. Again and again, Africa reveals something that does not fit neatly into the timeline, the theory, or the comfort of modern understanding. And that may be what makes these discoveries so fascinating and so unsettling. Because the deeper we look, the more we are forced to confront a difficult possibility, that our world is older, stranger, and far less understood than we like to believe. Tonight, we journey through some of the most disturbing, mysterious, and unexplained discoveries ever found in Africa, from ancient human relatives and forgotten civilizations to impossible landscapes, eerie artifacts, and secrets still hidden beneath stone. And with each one, the question grows harder to ignore. What else is still waiting there, undiscovered? Homo naledi, the human relative that shouldn't exist. Few discoveries are more unsettling than finding a new human relative that seems to break the rules. In 2013, deep inside a cave system in South Africa's cradle of humankind, explorers pushed through a narrow passage later nicknamed the Chute of Death. Beyond it, hidden in the darkness, they found a chamber filled with ancient bones from a previously unknown species. It was named Homo naledi. What made the discovery so strange was how badly this species fit the timeline. Homo naledi lived between about 236,000 and 335,000 years ago, yet it had a brain no larger than a chimpanzee's. By older scientific assumptions, a species like this should have belonged to a much earlier world. And yet its body told a more complicated story. Its hands and wrists suggest precise gripping, possibly even tool use. Its shoulders were well suited for climbing and reaching. Some features looked primitive, others felt surprisingly human. It was the kind of mix that made scientists stop and rethink the neat version of evolution many had grown comfortable with. But the biggest mystery was not what Homo naledi looked like, it was where the bodies were found. The chamber lay deep inside the cave, in a place difficult to reach even with modern equipment. There were no clear signs of predators, no evidence of a flood, and no easy reasons so many individuals would end up there by accident. That leaves one unsettling possibility. The bodies may have been placed there deliberately. If that is true, then Homo naledi may have practiced some form of intentional burial or ritual behavior, something once thought to belong only to more advanced humans. And that is what makes this discovery so powerful. Homo naledi was not supposed to exist like this. Not here, and not this late in time. But it did. And in Africa, that is often how the deepest mysteries begin. The oldest stone tools, where technology may have begun. Long before cities, metal, or even fire, there was stone. And in Africa, archaeologists have found some of the oldest tools ever made. Objects so ancient they push the beginnings of technology deeper into prehistory than many once imagined. Near Lake Turkana in Kenya, researchers uncovered stone tools dating back about 3.3 million years. That makes them older than the earliest known members of the genus Homo, which means something even more unsettling. Tool making may have begun before true humans ever appeared. These were not random broken rocks. They were deliberately shaped. Hammerstones, cores, and sharp flakes show clear signs of planning and force. Whoever made them understood that one stone could be used to strike another, and produce an edge sharp enough to cut, scrape, or crush. It was a simple act by modern standards, but in evolutionary terms, it was a revolution. Because a tool is never just a tool, it is evidence of foresight. It means a mind was already beginning to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be changed. A stone was no longer just a stone. It could become an extension of the hand. That is why these discoveries matter so much. They suggest that intelligence, adaptation, and innovation may have started taking shape far earlier than we once believed, and perhaps in species we still do not fully understand. In other words, the roots of technology may not begin with us. They may begin with something older, more primitive, and far more difficult to define. And if that is true, then Africa did not just witness the rise of humanity. It may have witnessed the first moment when thought itself became a tool. Africa's oldest dinosaur, a predator from the dawn of time. Before Africa became the cradle of human history, it was home to something far older and far more alien. More than 230 million years ago, during the early Triassic, a small predator moved across a world still recovering from mass extinction. The continents were joined together then, fused into the supercontinent Pangaea, and the age of dinosaurs was only just beginning. In northern Zimbabwe, scientists uncovered the remains of one of the oldest dinosaurs ever found in Africa. It was called Madagascar. At first glance, it does not look like the kind of creature that would dominate the imagination. It was relatively small, measuring about 6 feet long and only around a foot tall at the hip. But size is not what makes this animal important. What matters is where it stands in time. Madagascar lived near the very beginning of dinosaur evolution, close to the moment when dinosaurs were first emerging from a much larger and stranger cast of reptilian life. Its body was built for speed, balance, and movement on 2 legs, traits that hint at the agility early dinosaurs may have relied on to survive in a harsh and unstable world. And that is what makes the discovery so powerful. This was not one of the giant dinosaurs people usually picture. No towering neck, no crushing jaws, no thunderous footsteps. Instead, it belonged to a much earlier chapter, a quieter, more uncertain age when dinosaurs had not yet taken over the planet. In a way that makes it even more haunting, because this fossil captures a world before dinosaurs ruled the Earth, when their future was still unwritten, and survival itself was an experiment. And once again, it is Africa that holds the evidence, not just of where humanity may have begun, but of a far deeper past, one that stretches back to the first shadows of a vanished world. The fairy circles of Namibia, perfect patterns no one can fully explain. From the ground, Namibia's desert grasslands can seem almost empty, but from above, the landscape tells a very different story. Scattered across the earth are thousands of near-perfect circles, bare patches surrounded by grass, repeating again and again across vast stretches of land. Some are only a few feet wide, others span several meters. Together, they create one of Africa's strangest natural patterns, the fairy circles. For decades, scientists have tried to explain how they form. One theory points to sand termites, suggesting the insects alter the soil in ways that help trap moisture around the edges, allowing grass to grow in a ring. Another idea argues the circles are created by competition between plants, with grasses spacing themselves out in a way that maximizes access to water in an unforgiving climate. Both explanations make sense, and neither explains everything. Some circles grow, fade, and reappear over time. Others remain stable for years. Their sizes vary. Their spacing is strangely consistent. And even now, no single theory fully accounts for the full pattern across the landscape. That is what makes them so compelling. Because the fairy circles do not look random, they look designed. Not by human hands, but by some hidden logic in the desert, a system so precise that it feels almost intentional, even if it is not. And that uneasy feeling is part of their power. The more perfectly nature arranges itself, the more we start looking for a mind behind it. But in Namibia, all we have are circles, silence, and a mystery written directly into the ground. The Eye of the Sahara, a giant mark visible from space. There are few places on Earth that look less natural at first glance than the Eye of the Sahara. From space, it appears as a vast series of concentric rings carved into the desert, so large, so clean, and so strangely symmetrical that early astronauts could hardly miss it. Set deep in the barren landscape of Mauritania, this formation stretches for roughly 25 miles across, making it one of the most recognizable geological features on the planet. It is officially known as the Richat structure, and for years people struggled to explain what they were looking at. At first, many assumed it had to be the scar of a massive meteor impact. The shape seemed too perfect, too monumental, too deliberate to be anything else. Others saw something even stranger in it, the possible remains of a lost civilization, or a structure tied to legends like Atlantis. But the truth, as far as science can tell, is both less fantastical and no less remarkable. The Eye of the Sahara appears to be the result of uplift and erosion working over an immense span of time. Layers of rock were pushed upward, then slowly worn away by wind and water, revealing the giant ringed pattern we see today. What looks like a symbol stamped into the earth is really geology exposing its own history. And yet the mystery has never fully disappeared. Because even when you know what it is, it still does not feel real. It feels too deliberate, too monumental, too much like a signal. That is what gives the Eye of the Sahara its power. It reminds us that nature can create forms so strange, so precise, and so enormous that even from orbit, they look like something the world was never supposed to make. Madagascar's stone forest, a landscape built like a trap. Madagascar is often imagined as a world of rare animals and lush, untamed beauty. But in one remote corner of the island, the landscape turns into something far less welcoming. Here, the ground rises into a maze of razor-sharp limestone spires known as singi, towering stone blades carved over millions of years by water, pressure, and time. From a distance, it looks almost unreal, like a forest turned to rock. Up close, it feels more like a trap. The formations are jagged, narrow, and densely packed, with deep fissures, hidden gaps, and knife-like ridges that can slice through skin and gear alike. Some rise more than 200 feet into the air, forming a terrain so hostile that even moving through it becomes a test of balance, patience, and nerve. And that danger is exactly what makes it so extraordinary. Because where humans struggle to pass, life has adapted in silence. In the cracks, cliffs, and isolated pockets of this stone labyrinth, rare species have found refuge. Animals and plants that exist nowhere else on Earth. The landscape is brutal, but it protects what it hides. That is part of what gives the stone forest its eerie power. It does not feel shaped for life. It feels shaped to keep the world out. And yet life remains there anyway, clinging to ledges, disappearing into shadows, surviving in spaces that seem almost impossible to reach. In Madagascar, even the land can feel alive in a way that is difficult to explain. Not peaceful, not welcoming, but ancient, watchful, and built with the cold logic of something far older than us. The Skeleton Coast, where the ocean leaves only bones. Few coastlines on Earth feel as hostile as this one. Stretching along the Atlantic edge of Namibia, the Skeleton Coast is a place where sea, fog, and desert collide, and where almost nothing that arrives is meant to stay intact. From the air, it looks hauntingly empty. On the ground, it feels like the aftermath of something ancient and violent. Shipwrecks lie scattered along the shore, half buried in sand, their rusting frames slowly being swallowed by the desert. Whale bones have washed up here for generations. Seal colonies crowd the beaches and offshore rocks, filling the air with noise, decay, and the constant presence of death. It is a landscape that seems to preserve ruin. And that is exactly what made it so feared. For sailors, this coast was once a nightmare. Heavy surf, hidden rocks, and dense fog made navigation deadly. Ships that drifted too close could break apart in the waves, and those who survived the wreck often faced something just as lethal on land. Endless desert, almost no fresh water, and no clear path out. That is why the name fits so well. Not because the coast is empty, but because it remembers everything. It keeps the evidence. Bones, wreckage, silence. Even today, the skeleton coast does not feel like a place shaped for human presence. It feels like a boundary, a narrow strip where the ocean gives things up and the land refuses to return them. In Africa, some landscapes inspire wonder. This one inspires something colder. Because here the natural world does not just look wild, it looks like it has already won. The Dendera light. Did ancient Egypt really understand electricity? Few ancient images have sparked more modern speculation than this one. Inside the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt, a carved relief appears to show something that looks strangely familiar to modern eyes. A large oval object, almost like a glass bulb, with a serpent-like form inside it, connected to a pillar-shaped structure below. To some viewers, it looks uncannily like an ancient light source, a kind of prehistoric electric lamp carved in stone. And that is where the mystery begins. For years, alternative theories have claimed this relief proves the ancient Egyptians understood some form of electricity. The resemblance feels tempting. There is the bulb shape, the elongated form inside it, and the supporting column that at first glance can seem almost mechanical. But the closer scholars look, the less convincing that interpretation becomes. Mainstream Egyptology offers a very different explanation, that the image is symbolic, not technological. The so-called bulb is understood as a sacred form tied to Egyptian religious imagery, while the serpent represents divine power and creation. The pillar beneath it is often identified as the Jed, a symbol of stability deeply rooted in Egyptian belief. In other words, what looks modern to us may simply be ancient symbolism seen through modern eyes. And yet the relief still unsettles people. Because it sits in that uncomfortable space between resemblance and meaning, it does not actually prove ancient electricity. There is no accepted archaeological evidence that the Egyptians built electric lighting systems, wires, or working devices of that kind. But the image is strange enough and familiar enough to keep the question alive. That is why the Dendera light continues to fascinate, not because it confirms a lost technology, but because it reveals how easily the past can seem to mirror the present. Sometimes the real mystery is not whether ancient people had modern machines. It is why certain symbols, thousands of years later, still look like they are trying to tell us something we almost understand. The hidden void inside the Great Pyramid. For more than 4,500 years, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood as one of the most studied structures on Earth. And yet it is still hiding something. In 2017, an international team using muon scanning, a technique that tracks subatomic particles as they pass through stone, detected a massive hidden void deep inside the pyramid. The space appeared to stretch for more than 100 feet, making it one of the most significant internal discoveries ever made inside the monument. What makes it so unsettling is not just its size. It is the fact that no one knows exactly why it is there. The Great Pyramid has already been examined for centuries. Its chambers, corridors, and architectural alignments have fascinated engineers, archaeologists, and historians alike. So the idea that such a large, empty space could remain unknown for thousands of years feels almost impossible. And yet it did. For some researchers, the explanation may be structural. The void could be a relieving chamber, an architectural gap designed to reduce pressure inside the pyramid. It may serve a practical purpose rather than a ceremonial one. But until it is studied more directly, that remains only a theory. And where knowledge ends, speculation rushes in. Some have imagined a hidden chamber, a sealed archive, or a room with a purpose never recorded in surviving Egyptian history. None of those ideas are supported by evidence. But the mere existence of the void is enough to keep the pyramid's oldest power alive. The sense that it still knows something we do not. That may be the most remarkable part. Even now, after centuries of measurement, excavation, and debate, the Great Pyramid is not finished revealing itself. It remains what it has always been, not just a monument of stone, but a structure built around mystery. Hexagonal diamonds from space. Most diamonds are born deep inside the Earth, under immense heat and pressure. But some appear to come from somewhere far more violent. In South Africa, researchers studied unusual diamonds with a rare hexagonal structure, a form different from the cubic crystal pattern seen in ordinary diamonds. Known as lonsdaleite, these crystals are believed to form under the extreme shock of cosmic impact, when meteorites strike with forces far beyond anything found in normal geological processes. That alone would make them remarkable, but their deeper significance lies in what they suggest. These are not just rare gemstones, they are traces of catastrophe, evidence that material from space can be transformed in an instant into something both beautiful and almost unnatural. In some cases, their composition points to origins tied to carbon-rich meteorites, linking them not just to impact, but to matter that may have traveled across the early solar system before ever reaching Earth. In other words, these diamonds may carry a history older than the planet as we know it. That is what gives the discovery its strange power. A diamond usually feels like something permanent, stable, and buried. But these crystals tell a different story, one of collision, pressure, and destruction on a planetary scale. They are not symbols of calm geological time. They are the aftermath of violence from beyond the Earth. And in Africa, where some of humanity's oldest stories begin, even the stones can hold evidence of something much older still. A time when worlds collided, shattered, and left fragments of themselves behind. The Klerksdorp spheres, natural formation or something stranger. Some of the strangest objects ever found in Africa are small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Discovered in ancient rock deposits near Klerksdorp, South Africa, these mysterious spheres have fascinated people for decades. Many are roughly round, some are flattened, and a number of them appear to carry shallow grooves running around their surface. Details that have made them look, at least to some eyes, almost manufactured. And that is exactly why they became so controversial. The rock layers where they were found are incredibly old, dating back billions of years. So when people see smooth, banded spheres coming out of stone that ancient, the imagination starts moving fast. Some have claimed they are evidence of a lost civilization. Others have gone even further, suggesting some kind of non-human intelligence. But the scientific explanation is much less dramatic and still surprisingly strange. Geologists generally identify the spheres as natural mineral concretions, formed over immense spans of time as minerals slowly accumulated and hardened inside sedimentary rock. In other words, they were not carved or engineered, they grew. Still, that does not make them any less eerie, because they do not look the way most people expect nature to look. The grooves, the symmetry, the compact shape, all of it creates the unsettling impression of design even where none exists. They sit in that uncomfortable space between artifact and geology, where the eye sees intention before the mind accepts chance. And that may be why the Klerksdorp spheres continue to endure in mystery culture. Not because science has no answer, but because nature, once again, has produced something that looks disturbingly close to intelligence. The Blue Stone of Sierra Leone. Some discoveries feel mysterious because they are ancient. Others feel mysterious because they do not seem to belong anywhere at all. In Sierra Leone, reports of a strange blue stone have fueled exactly that kind of fascination. An object described as unusually vivid in color, difficult to classify, and strangely out of place compared to the rocks around it. What drew attention was not just its appearance, but the sense that it looked almost artificial, as if it had been made rather than formed. And that is where the unease begins. Because when an object looks manufactured, people instinctively start asking the same questions. Who made it? How old is it? And why does it seem so different from everything around it? In cases like this, the real problem is often not the object itself, but the gap between appearance and proof. A stone can look unnatural without actually being unnatural. Unusual color, composition, or texture can easily create the illusion of design, especially when the material is poorly understood or only known from limited samples. That uncertainty is what gives discoveries like this their power. The Blue Stone of Sierra Leone sits in the same unsettling category as so many other anomalies. Not fully explained, visually striking, and just strange enough to invite theories far beyond the evidence. Some see a geological rarity, others imagine something older, more deliberate, and harder to account for. And until its origin is understood with real certainty, it remains what the most effective mysteries always are. Not proof of the impossible, but a reminder of how quickly the unknown can start to look intentional. The crazy beast of Madagascar. Some extinct animals look unusual. This one looks like evolution lost control. When scientists uncovered the remains of a bizarre prehistoric mammal in Madagascar, they gave it a name that captured the reaction almost perfectly. Adelatherium, a name often translated as crazy beast. And the more they studied it, the more fitting that name seemed. This creature lived around 66 million years ago, near the end of the age of dinosaurs. It was about the size of a badger, with a low, sturdy body, short limbs, and a skull unlike anything researchers expected to find. Its snout was strange. Its teeth were strange. Even the holes and structures in its skull seemed unusually complex, hinting at senses and adaptations that did not fit neatly into any familiar pattern. It looked like a mammal built from mismatched parts, and that is what made it so fascinating. Madagascar spent millions of years in geographic isolation, cut off from other landmasses long enough for evolution to move in directions found nowhere else on Earth. Adelatherium may be one of the clearest examples of what happens when life is left alone long enough to experiment. But even by those standards, it was odd. Its body suggests an animal adapted for digging or rooting through the ground, yet its anatomy also points to a much stranger evolutionary story, one that does not line up cleanly with the mammals scientists expected from that period. It was not just rare, it seemed out of place, as if it belonged to a branch of life that had followed its own private rules. That is why the crazy beast matters, not because it was a monster, but because it reminds us how incomplete the fossil record really is. Entire worlds once existed with creatures so strange that, without bones and stone, we might never have believed they were real. And in Madagascar, one of those lost worlds left behind a beast that still feels less like science and more like something recovered from a dream. The Tree of Life. Africa's impossible Baobabs. Not every mystery in Africa feels dark. Some feel almost impossible in a different way. Across the dry landscapes of the continent, baobab trees rise like something out of myth. Massive, swollen trunks rooted in harsh ground, with branches that can make them look as if they were planted upside down. They do not just survive where other trees struggle. They seem built for conditions that should destroy them. That is why baobabs are often called the tree of life. Some can live for thousands of years. Their trunks can store extraordinary amounts of water, allowing them to endure long periods of drought in places where life is constantly under pressure. Their leaves, fruit, bark, and seeds have all served human communities in different ways, as food, fiber, medicine, and shelter. In some regions, a single baobab can feel less like a tree than a living reservoir. And yet what makes them so remarkable is not just their usefulness, it is their presence. Baobabs do not look fragile, they look ancient, almost defiant. They stand in open landscapes like survivors from another age, holding water, memory, and time inside bodies so large they seem to resist normal rules of growth. Some have hollow interiors. Some split and regrow in ways that make them seem almost indestructible. Even in decline, they often appear less like dying trees than monuments slowly changing shape. That is what makes them such a powerful reset in a story like this. Because after so many unsettling discoveries, the baobab reminds us that Africa's deepest mysteries are not always buried underground or hidden in ruins. Sometimes they are alive, visible, and towering in plain sight. And the longer you look at them, the stranger they become. Not frightening, but improbable. As if nature once again decided to create something that should not quite work, and made it endure for centuries anyway. The unreadable stones of the kingdom of Kush. Some civilizations disappear in silence. Others leave behind a voice we can still see, but cannot fully understand. In the lands south of ancient Egypt, along the Nile in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush once rose into one of the most powerful civilizations in Africa. It built cities, ruled kings and queens, traded across vast distances, and at times stood as both rival and equal to Egypt itself. And yet much of its world remains locked away. Among the ruins of Kush, archaeologists have found inscribed stones, temple texts, funerary carvings, and royal monuments written in the Meroitic script, one of the oldest known writing systems in sub-Saharan Africa. The letters can be identified, some names and titles can be recognized, but the language itself is still only partially understood, which means the stones are not silent. They are speaking. We just cannot fully follow what they are saying. That is what makes them so haunting. These inscriptions were carved by a real civilization with its own politics, beliefs, rituals in memory of power. They were meant to preserve something: names, offerings, dedications, prayers, authority. But now they stand as messages suspended in time, clear in form and elusive in meaning. And that loss is bigger than it first seems. Because when a language remains unread, an entire worldview remains partially hidden with it. Not just facts, but thought. Not just names, but meaning. Every unread line is a reminder that even great civilizations can slip out of history so completely that their own words become a kind of monument to absence. That is why the stones of Kush feel so powerful. They are not broken enough to be forgotten, and not understood enough to be restored. They remain in between, fragments of a lost African power, still waiting for the day their voice becomes fully human again. Great Zimbabwe, the ruins people refuse to believe were African. Some ruins are mysterious because we do not know who built them. Great Zimbabwe became controversial because people refused to accept the answer. Spread across the highlands of present-day Zimbabwe, These vast stone ruins were once the center of a powerful African kingdom that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries. At its height, Great Zimbabwe was home to thousands of people and served as a major hub of trade, wealth, and political power in southern Africa. Its walls are still astonishing today. Built from carefully stacked granite blocks, some rise more than 30 feet high and curve across the landscape with a precision that feels almost unreal. No mortar holds them together, just stone, balance, and extraordinary skill. The site includes royal enclosures, ceremonial spaces, and evidence of a complex urban society connected to long-distance trade networks that reach the Indian Ocean. That should have been a story of achievement. Instead, for generations, it became a story of denial. When European colonizers and early outsiders encountered Great Zimbabwe, many simply refused to believe that local African societies could have built something so large and sophisticated. Rather than accept the evidence in front of them, they invented other explanations, attributing the ruins to foreigners, lost civilizations, or biblical visitors from distant lands. The real reason was simpler and far more revealing. Colonial ideology could not tolerate African greatness on its own terms. That is what makes Great Zimbabwe so powerful in this story. The mystery was never truly in the stones. It was in the minds of the people looking at them. Because the ruins did not challenge history, they challenged prejudice. They exposed how easily entire civilizations can be stripped of their accomplishments when the truth becomes inconvenient. And even now, Great Zimbabwe stands as more than an archaeological site. It is a monument not just to a lost African kingdom, but to a deeper distortion, the long refusal to see Africa's past as fully human, complex, and brilliant in its own right. Prehistoric rock art, messages from minds we no longer understand. Some of the oldest human stories in Africa were never written down. They were painted onto stone. Across caves, cliffs, and rock shelters from Namibia to the Sahara, ancient artists left behind scenes of animals, hunters, rituals, and human figures moving through a world that no longer exists. Some of these images are thousands of years old, and even now many still feel startlingly alive. You can see the precision in them, the motion, the attention to muscle, posture, and rhythm. Elephants, antelope, giraffes, and human forms appear with a level of observation that feels anything but primitive. These were not random markings. They were made by people watching the world closely and trying to preserve something about it. But not everything in the art is easy to recognize. Mixed among the familiar animals and hunting scenes are stranger images, distorted human forms, hybrid-looking beings, exaggerated features, and symbolic patterns whose meaning has long been lost. Some appear ceremonial, others feel dreamlike. A few look almost otherworldly, and that is where the distance becomes real. Because we can still see the images, but we can no longer fully enter the minds that made them. We do not know exactly what every figure meant, what every symbol referred to, or what kind of spiritual world these artists believed they were recording. That is what gives prehistoric rock art its power. It is not just ancient, it is intimate. It brings us face to face with human thought from a world so distant that even when the image survives, the meaning can remain out of reach. What is left behind is not silence exactly, but something more unsettling. A message still visible, still deliberate, and no longer fully translatable. In Africa, some ruins preserve stone. These preserve consciousness, or at least the fading outline of it. The Congo Monolith Panic. Not every mystery in Africa comes from the distant past. Some appear suddenly and reveal how quickly fear can still take hold. When a metallic monolith was reported in Congo in 2021, it immediately triggered suspicion, rumors, and unease. Similar structures had already appeared in other parts of the world, often treated as internet curiosities or public art stunts. But in Congo, the reaction felt different. Here, the object was not seen as playful. It was seen as a warning. For some locals, the tall, reflective structure felt like an intrusion, something unnatural, possibly dangerous, and deeply unsettling. In a place where spiritual belief, rumor, and uncertainty can collide fast, the monolith became more than an object. It became a symbol people projected fear onto. And that is what makes the episode worth remembering. Because even in the modern world, mystery still follows an ancient pattern. When something appears without explanation, people do not just ask what it is, they ask what it means. South Africa's false diamond rush. Sometimes the strangest discoveries are not about what was found, they are about what people needed it to be. In 2021, after shimmering stones were uncovered in a rural area of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, thousands of people rushed to the site hoping they had stumbled onto a diamond field. Word spread fast. Families arrived with shovels, bags, and impossible expectations. For a brief moment, the land became a theater of hope. And hope can move faster than evidence. The stones looked promising enough to ignite a frenzy. In a region shaped by hardship and inequality, the idea that fortune might be lying just under the soil was almost too powerful to resist. Makeshift camps appeared. People dug through the earth for days, driven by the belief that their lives might change overnight. But when geologists tested the stones, the result was far less dramatic. They were quartz, not diamonds. By then, the real story was no longer geological. It was human. Because this was never just about minerals. It was about desperation, belief, and the speed at which rumor can become reality when enough people need a miracle to be true. The ground did not change. The stones did not change. Only the meaning projected onto them did. And that may be what makes the episode so revealing. In a video filled with ancient mysteries and unexplained objects, this one reminds us that the mind can create its own kind of discovery, one shaped not by science, but by longing. Why Africa still frightens science. Africa does not unsettle science because it is full of monsters. It unsettles science because it keeps revealing how incomplete our understanding still is. Again and again, this continent forces us to confront the same uncomfortable truth, that the story of our world and of ourselves is far older, stranger, and less settled than we like to believe. And maybe that is what makes Africa so powerful. Not that it hides the unknown, but that it keeps proving the unknown is still everywhere.